Used to work that way.
When you press, are you already live?
Yeah.
They'll pop up right here.
In case I disappear anywhere, this is what I look like.
All right. Zach, we're ready when you're ready.
All right, I'm ready.
Okay, everybody, silence your cell phones.
All right, Mr. Spano, wait for the cue.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Joe Spano, and for those of you on Facebook, we are here live right now in the beautiful city of Owensboro, Kentucky. I want to welcome you to the debate for the candidates for the House of Representatives of the United States of America from the 2nd Congressional District of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Thank you. And I want to thank you for coming out to exercise your right and fulfill your civic duty. And I'd like to thank you for allowing me to participate. Now, to start the proceedings, I would like to say the Pledge of Allegiance with you all. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now, first, I would like to introduce you to the Democratic challenger, Hank Linderman, out of Falls of Rough, is that right? And next, I would like to introduce you to the Republican incumbent, Brent Guthrie. I would like to, but obviously I can't. Because though invited both publicly and by registered letter, he has chosen not to attend. So we put an empty chair as a stand-in for Congressman Guthrie. And according to the New England Journal of Medicine, these costs will rise to 30% of GDP by 2040. In contrast, other nations in the developed world are operating at about 11% of GDP, covering 99% of their citizens. What methods do other nations use to control costs?
Thank you, Mr. Spano. Well, I could talk about several nations, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the nation of France. And for example, they use a non-profit health insurance corporation that's funded by the government. It's paid fund, and that covers the general health care needs of their citizens. That obviously saves quite a bit of money, and it covers everyone in the country. There are certain needs that are, certain health requirements that are not covered by that program, and for that you can buy supplemental insurance that covers mental, dental, vision, and hearing, and that costs about $90 a month. So significantly less money than we spend. The French, by the way, do all of this for about 11% of their gross domestic product, and they are very often rated at the top of the comparative list that's put out by the World Health Organization. They've often been number one. Now, that's just costs, but let's talk about their results. And the French get much better results than we do. They have longer life expectancies, and their life expectancies are continuing to improve, where ours are actually dropping for the last 2 years. They have lower rates of serious disease, lower infant mortality rates, and it's safer to be a pregnant mom in France than it is in the United States. In fact, the United States has now slipped to last among developed nations in terms of a place that a mom would want to be pregnant. Now, the French also have something they do as far as the price of drugs, and they negotiate the price of all drugs each year, and that's done by their government. So they are the only purchaser of drugs. That gives them tremendous leverage. The companies that sell the drugs still make a profit, but they are held to a responsible profit. The French have a concept that's called solidarity. And what that means is the sicker you get, the less you pay. I spoke with a Frenchman who had lived and worked in the United States for 12 years and was now back in France working. So he had experienced both systems. And he told me that his father had been diagnosed with cancer and had 2.5 years of treatment before he passed. And he said it was terrible for the family, but they never paid a bill. And that in France, they believe that it's barbaric in the United States that someone who gets sick loses their house and their life savings. And in fact, by year 4, virtually everyone who gets a serious disease has gone through their life savings and perhaps their house. In New Zealand, if you go to visit New Zealand and you're a legal visitor and you have an accident or in some cases even a flare-up of your condition, they will treat you for free. So we have lots of room to improve. I've been proposing health care for all, meaning we all need to be covered. It needs to be much less expensive. It needs to be much easier to use. Anyone who has argued with an insurance company knows what I'm talking about. And it needs to be focused on the health of the patients, not quarterly profits. There's a current proposal in the House, House Resolution 676, the Improved and Expanded Medicare for All Act, and that's the closest thing that's being proposed that could achieve those goals. On the other hand, it certainly would be worthwhile for us to examine other successful healthcare systems, other modern healthcare systems throughout the developed world to see how far we could take things and how much better of a healthcare system we could give to our citizens.
Thank you, Mr. Linderman. Congressman?
I voted to repeal the Affordable Care Act 54 times, which would have removed coverage for pre-existing conditions. I prefer the market-set prices for prescription drugs.
Thank you. Mr. Linderman, the recent tax cut gave $1 trillion to wealthy individuals and corporations. According to Senator Mitch McConnell and House Speaker Paul Ryan, Social Security and Medicare must be cut in order to pay for the resulting deficit. Do we need to cut Social Security and Medicare?
My first answer is no, we do not need to cut Social Security and Medicare to pay for a tax cut. Now, this tax cut was misrepresented from the beginning. It was called a middle-class tax cut, as if we couldn't see what was actually going on. 2/3 of that tax cut went to wealthy individuals and corporations, most of whom did not need a tax cut. And now there's a $1 trillion hole in the budget that the House leadership, Paul Ryan and Senator Mitch McConnell from the Senate are proposing needs to be paid for by cutting Social Security and Medicare. I have sat with Kentuckians who live on fixed incomes, and they are living as close as they can to the edge, and it's an uncomfortable feeling, especially as you're growing old. Folks who are growing old in the United States should be able to grow old with dignity. They've paid into Social Security all their lives. And occasionally years go by without even a cost of living adjustment. When they do get a cost of living adjustment, sometimes the housing they're in is very aware of that adjustment and they increase their rent by the exact amount of the increase, which means that increases in other services, telephone, food, insurance, etc., doesn't get accounted for. So these are folks who are falling behind bit by bit. And that's not correct. That's not it's not the way we should be treating our citizens. So we must not cut Social Security and Medicare to pay for these tax cuts. To the contrary, these programs must be fully funded and expanded. We can pay for the hole in our deficit by repealing the portions that benefit wealthy corporations and individuals.
Thank you. Congressman Guthrie.
It's a middle-class tax cut.
Thank you. Mr. Linderman, there is currently $1.5 trillion in student loan debt, and 10% of these loans are in arrears. Additionally, these loans are not subject to relief by bankruptcy. How would you solve the student loan crisis and address the need for higher education in the United States?
I support forgiving all student loan debt. It's $1.5 trillion right now. And only a few years ago, this was $1.3 trillion. So this is a debt that is exploding, and the amount of students that cannot find work and are saddled with this debt, and it's debt they cannot escape through bankruptcy. Now, for example, if you're a real estate developer in New York, just for example, and you like to build big buildings and put your name on them, you can go bankrupt 5 or 6 times and it's not a problem. And however you feel about bankruptcy, there are times when maybe it's appropriate to go bankrupt. So this real estate developer, this fictional real estate developer, can go bankrupt 5, 6 times, but students can't. And I think that's wrong. We've been watching as higher education becomes more and more expensive, and it's financed by predatory lenders who take advantage. And just a little bit of investigation on the web will tell you some of the horror stories. There was a study recently done by Bard College, and they investigated forgiving all student debt and found it would be a net positive to the economy, because students who are paying this student debt cannot buy cars, they can't buy houses, and they cannot start small businesses. So that's why I favor forgiving this debt. We also need to reduce the cost of higher education. Now, the nation of Germany, recently they were charging, I believe, $1,500 or $1,800 a year or a semester. Doesn't matter, whatever it was. They decided it was too expensive. You can now get university education for free in the nation of Germany, and they view this as an investment in their nation's future. I think we need to investigate that same sort of thing.
Thank you. Congressman.
My Prosper bill cuts $15 billion from higher education funding and ends student loan forgiveness programs for public employees.
I want to add an additional comment about the Prosper bill. It's like so many bills that we've seen over the last couple of years. It's named something that really is not exactly honest as far as what the contents of the bill are. And I have a joint quote from several education experts regarding the Prosper bill. Quote, if rogue for-profit colleges and private lenders were to dream up a higher education bill that lines their own pockets at the expense of working and middle-class students, this would be it, end quote. This bill's real purpose is to privatize and monetize higher education.
Congressman, if you have any response to this particular rejoinder, please get in touch with us. Mr. Linderman, according to a 2014 study done by the American Medical Association, states with legalized cannabis have lower rates of opioid and pain pill use, addiction, and overdose. Do you support legalization of medical marijuana and rescheduling cannabis away from Schedule I of the Controlled Substances Act?
I do support legalization of medical marijuana. And I do support rescheduling marijuana, rescheduling cannabis away from Schedule I. By the way, drugs classified as Schedule I cannot be studied by the FDA. So just in order to be able to study marijuana further, it needs to be scheduled away. But Schedule I drugs are considered wildly addictive and no medical value whatsoever. I disagree about cannabis. Cannabis has been shown to be effective in pain relief, in treating certain mental disorders such as anxiety, and it's effective for certain types of childhood epilepsy. In fact, it's the only way to treat certain types of childhood epilepsy. It can also be used in treatment for multiple sclerosis and cancer. So yes, I support legalization. Kentucky is one of 5 states that already grows $1 billion worth of marijuana. Now, this is a state issue. Our state is $1 billion in debt. And if we followed the lead of other states, we would be putting some citizens to work instead of putting them in prison. And we'd be putting more money into our treasury. With this caveat, Marijuana is a drug, and like any drug, it has to be kept out of the hands of children. It must be completely kept away from minors. And if you're going to use a drug, you're going to pay a cost of some sort, and that applies to caffeine and it applies to aspirin. So responsible use of this, the same way responsible use of alcohol or tobacco, is what we're talking about here, okay, for cannabis. There we go.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Linderman. Congressman.
I do not support rescheduling marijuana or any legalization unless and until the FDA approves it, which they will not do while it is Schedule 1. You might as well use heroin.
Thank you. Mr. Linderman, the opioid crisis claimed 2/3 of the 77,000 Americans lost last year to death by overdose. More deaths than by automobile accidents and gun violence combined. Many of these people were prescribed opioids after a work-related injury only to become addicted. Mr. Guthrie recently sponsored a bill which has passed the House related to this crisis. What are your thoughts on dealing with addiction and on Mr. Guthrie's bill?
First of all, I want to talk briefly about addiction. Addiction does not care what your religion is. Addiction doesn't care how much money you earn. It doesn't care how old you are. It doesn't care what your morality is. If you become an addict, you are in the control of something that can take your life. And it's especially poignant to me that so many folks who have become addicted were prescribed this addiction. So it's our primary healthcare crisis, and it's probably why our life expectancies in the United States have been dropping. For too long, we've been putting addicts in prison where they may not receive any treatment for their addiction. They're just put in a box. When the prisons are private for-profit prisons, it's even worse. Why should a corporation that's earning $65 a day in profits ever release you? This is part of why America has become the world's largest jailer. We've got 4.7% of the world's population, 22% of the world's prisoners. We have more actual prisoners than North Korea, China, and Russia combined. So after years of inaction, Mr. Guthrie has sponsored a bill which promises a more comprehensive approach to addiction. But there are serious problems with this bill. First, it's designed to favor treatment with certain drugs, including one called Vivitrol, which is a product of a corporation called Alkermes. There were a handful of companies that spent millions of dollars lobbying for this bill, including Alkermes. Disturbingly, one of the 4 lobbyists used by these corporations is Mr. Guthrie's former chief of staff. Nowhere does there seem to be any consideration of very effective anti-addiction programs that are elsewhere in the world, such as in the Netherlands, where they have cut the rate of death to practically zero. Now, in the United States, we have 245 people per million who die from drug overdose. In Kentucky, it's slightly higher. In the Netherlands, they have dropped it to 10 people per million. And they do this at a very, very low cost and higher rates of rehabilitation than we're able to achieve right now. So it unfortunately seems that Mr. Guthrie is only interested in dealing with addiction when there is money to be made, more privatization. So I propose even more comprehensive measures. We can cut the rate of death with a program similar to those used in the UK and the Netherlands. We can decriminalize addiction, and we should aggressively prosecute these irresponsible pharmaceutical companies that oversold their product. They shamed doctors and patients into using this drug. You won't get addicted, and they would say to doctors, you're kind of a jerk if you won't prescribe this drug. Some of these companies dropped 20 million doses over a 10-year period into a town in West Virginia with only 4,000 people into 2 pharmacies, and obviously they knew something was going on. And one Kentuckian referred to this as legalized crime. And now these same companies are trying to get us to buy their antidote so they can make even more money for this problem that they caused. Again, we need to work hard on prevention, because preventing abuse is going to be the most effective way of preventing addiction, and also legalizing marijuana. States with legal marijuana have lower rates of use, abuse, and overdose of opioids and other pain pills.
Thank you. And Congressman Guthrie.
We met with all the stakeholders. We just think most people need access to all the options.
Thank you. Mr. Linderman, more and more politicians are pledging to reject contributions from corporate political action committees, PACs. How much corporate PAC money have you accepted, and what industries are represented in these contributions?
I've not accepted any corporate PAC money, and I will not accept corporate PAC money. These contributions are at the root of what is wrong with America's government. Now, I speak to citizens throughout the district, and I speak to everyone. I can't tell by looking at someone if they're a Republican or a Democrat. And this is one of the issues that there is virtual 100% agreement across the board. We all agree that there is too much money in politics. Now, we've tried before to do campaign finance reform. It takes a lot of effort. The last successful one was McCain-Feingold, Senator John McCain and Senator Russ Feingold. But the result of that, I think it took 3 or 4 years to get it enacted into law, and the result of that is Citizens United, which just opened the floodgates. So I think we have to treat this problem as a cultural problem, meaning the voters must start to become aware of who is funding their candidates. So if you would like to know who funds your candidates, you can go to a website called opensecrets.org, type in the name of your candidate, you can type in my name, you can type in Congressman Guthrie's, and you'll see who is contributing to them. And it explains the way your congressman votes. And in the case of Mr. Guthrie, it explains why the way he votes is predetermined.
Thank you. Mr. Guthrie?
I take contributions from large internet service providers, large pharmaceutical corporations, and healthcare providers.
Thank you. Now, in Kentucky, a person earning minimum wage and working full-time will earn about $15,000 per year. This means that they will likely need food stamps or other government assistance just to get by. Do you support raising the minimum wage, and why?
I support raising the minimum wage to $15, yes. Now, this will have several benefits. First, there will be increased tax revenues, because when people earn more money, they have to pay more taxes. So that'll be good for our states and for our federal budget also. It will reduce the need for governmental assistance. You know, very often we see someone in front of us in line who's using using SNAP program and food stamps to pay for their food. And the reason for that is that they are not earning enough money. There's an idea that these are folks who are on welfare. The reality is they're actually working and can't make enough to get by, so they need that assistance. When we raise the minimum wage, we will also see greater prosperity for working people, and that's a good thing. Now, our stock market has risen over 20 times since 1985, while wages have actually dropped when you adjust for the cost of living. We have a lot of affluence in America, and some of it needs to be shared with those who earn the least. All of our lives will be better, our society will be more stable with a working class that's healthier, better educated, and a little more prosperous. And that's what I believe in.
Thank you. Congressman?
I do not support raising the minimum wage. Workers are paid enough already.
Thank you. Mr. Linderman, as a follow-up, you've talked about health care, education, Social Security. How will we pay for these programs?
This question gets asked quite often, and it's often used as a way to distract from the goals that we have in mind. And what I say is, when I get asked this question, is how do we pay for the F-35? And that's usually met with silence. How do we pay for the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, our presence in Syria? And the answer is, we just pay for it. Our big problem is we have to set our goals, we have to set our priorities. Now, my belief is that our greatest resource is our people, us, we the people. And we must be the priority. We need to rebalance our society so that the people get represented in their government. And that's how we should spend our money, to take care of our people.
Thank you. Congressman, do you have a response? Thank you. Well, I would like to thank one of you for being here and the other one... Well, enough said about that, but would you like to make a final statement?
I would indeed. I want to thank all the citizens of the 2nd District. You all have been wonderful to me as I traveled. I've been driving across the district since January 29th and meeting all of you, and it's been one of the joys of my life. There is less division out at the grassroots level than is presented in our media. We are all presented as fighting, but when you start talking to people, you find out there's actually less disagreement. And I see this again and again. Now, the disagreement we do have, and that's being fanned by various forces at our national level, is not good for our nation. It's certainly not good for Democrats. It's not good for Republicans. It is good for the forces that would divide us. And I believe that those are the forces of corporate PAC money, those that want to privatize and monetize every single part of our lives. We need to dial that back just a bit, reorganize and rebalance our society so that we can take on the actual real challenges we have, challenges like healthcare, challenges like the high cost of higher education, higher wages for people who work. And I want to mention, in rural districts like the 2nd, we are seeing a threat on the rural lifestyle for small farms. It's very difficult to get the kids to stay around and continue farming. It's difficult to earn a living out in rural America. And one of the reasons is we do not have robust broadband infrastructure in rural America. So I want to propose a national program similar to Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Rural Electrification Program in 1936, and similar to President Dwight D. Eisenhower's program, the Interstate Highway System, which was done in 1956. A public program to get infrastructure for broadband everywhere in rural America. This will make a massive difference. We can't wait for for-profit companies to decide that it's worth their time to do this. So I'm proposing that we do something like savings bonds. We can finance it that way, and we just make this happen. The nation of India 10 years ago was number 177 in the world in terms of installed broadband infrastructure. They are now number 1. It can be done, and it pays tremendous dividends. So we need to invest in our nation's future and in the future of the 2nd District. I'm asking for your vote this November 6th. I appreciate all of you, and here we go.
Thank you, Mr. Linderman. Thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you all so much.
Committed.
Thank you, Joe. Ladies and gentlemen, Joe Spano, what a guy. You know, when I asked Joe if he would come out, Joe contributed the maximum that he could contribute both to the primary and to the general. He held 2 fundraisers in his house in California. This is for an election in our 2nd District. This was important enough to him.
You guys deserve Hank.
Well, I called Joe and said, Joe, I think you would really have fun. It would be really great if you came out and sat next to me in the car and operated the phones and met some of these wonderful people that we are meeting. And he said, that sounds scary and fun. I'm coming. And here he is. We're taking Joe to Nashville tonight. He flies out tomorrow morning. He's been here for a week. What a guy.
Thank you.
Anybody wants a picture with Joe, I'm not going to be offended. He's here to help, okay?
I
Thank
wouldn't
you all.
be either.
Oh, we're going to, what's in the